So one of the things that's really exciting about RAD generally is it's a demonstration so that we are able to be nimble and have housing authorities propose ideas. And, initially it might come in a waiver or a one-off kind of way, and then we make it more prominent. And that creativity and entrepreneurial approach that housing authorities bring to RAD is really exciting.
Welcome to BuzzHouse, a Baker Tilly podcast where you can find all the buzz around multifamily housing. I'm Don Bernards, the partner in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice.
And I'm Garrick Gibson, a partner at Baker Tilly, also specializing in consulting on multifamily housing transactions across the country.
Each week, we'll bring you a guest or a topic in the multifamily housing industry that will help you win now and anticipate tomorrow. Let's get started. We are extremely excited to have Tom Davis join us on the BuzzHouse today. Many of you know Tom and his work around the Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD program, among other programs, of course, at HUD. Tom is part of senior leadership team at HUD in the Office of Multifamily Housing, and specifically is the director of the Office of Recapitalization. Tom, thank you very much for taking your time to join us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Tom, for just to start out for our listeners, would you be able to give just a little bit of background of yourself and in your career, and as well as the Office of Recapitalization at HUD?
Sure. Yeah, I've been at HUD for about 7 years now. Joined in June of 2015, and joined HUD to be the director of the Office of Recapitalization. And the office, as many of your listeners know, is most known for doing the rental assistance demonstration, but also was the office that handled the mark-to-market program through many years and still does, and has done a variety of other projects like the Green Retrofit program in the 2009-2010 era, handles a bunch of other preservation efforts like the Section 202 preservation activities, a variety of projects related primarily to preservation of existing affordable housing, although we sometimes have pitched in to help with, for example, the capital advance on the new 202s recently and that kind of thing. But most of our work relates to the preservation of at-risk affordable housing portfolios.
Thanks a lot for that background, Tom. Tom, I know you just had, we were just talking before this, you kind of presented, if you will, at NCSHA Credit Connect on evolution of RAD. And I think what's been so exciting for many of us in the affordable housing world is just, over the last decade, right, we've seen a lot of new programs or tweaks to programs, and just been a really exciting time and new creative tools. And, really starting out, I think Faircloth-to-RAD, I think was just huge. People were very excited to see, Faircloth-to-RAD. I think there's a lot of interest. Tom, would you be able to give our listeners just a background of this program and what are some early observations of the program, Faircloth-to-RAD?
Sure. So one of the things that's really exciting about RAD generally is it's a demonstration so that we are able to be nimble and have housing authorities propose ideas. And, initially it might come in a waiver or a one-off kind of way, and then we make it more prominent. And that creativity and entrepreneurial approach that housing authorities bring to RAD is really exciting. And we've seen it over the course of the 10 years of the program, with housing authorities finding a lot of ways to modernize their public housing portfolios. And we've seen it in the fact that over $14 billion worth of construction has been generated through the traditional RAD. And Faircloth-to-RAD is just the most recent example of this kind of entrepreneurial dynamic between HUD and the housing authorities and their development teams. We had conversations with housing authorities that were trying to figure out how they could activate their Faircloth units. And for listeners who don't know exactly what I refer to by Faircloth units, the housing authorities across the country have the authority to replace units that have been lost in the last 25 years. And that authority to get public housing operating subsidy on a unit that hasn't been in the portfolio, that has been lost since the late 1990s, is what people refer to as Faircloth authority. And people have wanted to restore these lost units, but have struggled to figure out mechanisms to do that. And in the course of some conversations with housing authorities interested in bringing on this Faircloth authority and activating it as new in effect, new rental assistance for households that haven't been served recently, what became clear is that a key barrier to bringing the units online has been the ability to underwrite the development. They could apply for tax credits, but without certainty about what the operating subsidy would be was a challenge. It was not impossible, but it was challenging. And the other piece that was part of the picture was that there are two entirely independent regulatory processes. One is the public housing development process, and then the other is the RAD process. And the thing that we realized is that we could pull these two together and make it a more integrated thing. And by providing the certainty of this is your post-RAD rent, your post-RAD conversion rent, what your Section 8 contract will look like, and Section 8 contracts are more easily underwritten than public housing regulatory documents, that combination of doing the upfront review, doing it in an integrated way around both of these regulatory actions, the development action and the RAD conversion action, providing that comfort that both will happen. And at the end of the day, this is what you'll have as a Section 8 contract and a Section 8 rent. That certainty has really primed a lot of interest in creating these units and restoring these units that have existed in the past. And already we've seen well over 30 projects coming in the door just in the year since we rolled out the concept. This was created in April of last year, April of 2021. And we've seen a lot of interest. And as I say, there are about 30 plus transactions in the pipeline at some point. And about half a dozen have gotten to the point of a major closing, either a construction closing or a conversion. And we're seeing just a lot of interest and a lot of excitement about this opportunity to reactivate rental assistance and serve more households.
Tom, that was a great background. It was exciting to hear. I didn't actually had not heard the number, so 30 plus projects is indeed very exciting.
And
Tom,
given that these are projects that pre-development on a real estate project takes a while, so for
right.
30 projects to be moving down the path already in just a year from not even thinking about this is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tom, maybe shifting gears just a little bit, we all know it's just unusual times for many, many reasons out there, but just on the real estate development with higher construction costs and higher interest rates and insurance costs, all these like barriers. And like you said, RAD has been so evolutionary and new ideas and how to help move projects. Are there any legislative ideas out there, proposed legislative thoughts, out there right now? And maybe kind of a two-part question, just even RAD itself, right, is out there, I think, as a time through September 2024 with that initial 455,000 units. Is there any thoughts to, I know it's 2 years out yet, but is there any thoughts to extending that? So I know it's kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, and 2 years out for a real estate development project is like not that far.
Right.
And particularly if you're a housing authority planning a portfolio strategy that has multiple properties involved, 2 years out is a blink of an eye. Your portfolio strategy is probably an 8-year plan or something like that. So yes, the short answer to your question is yes, there are some legislative proposals out there. Each year, HUD proposes through the president's budget some tweaks to the RAD program, and some years they're adopted and some years they're not. In the 2023 budget, which is the one that Congress is currently debating, there are a number of things that are that could be really impactful to the renovation and preservation of the existing public housing portfolio. First among them is we have requested $100 million for supplementing the RAD rents. As many of your listeners know, the RAD rents right now are pretty good. They're kind of for many housing authorities, they're a relative high watermark. But there are a lot of housing authorities that even in that context, the RAD rent doesn't allow them to deal with their capital needs and make the conversion transaction work. So we have, the past couple of years, asked for supplemental funding. Congress has not yet given us supplemental funding on the public housing side. They did just this past year in the 22 appropriations provide supplemental funding for one of the RAD Component 2 portfolios, the Section 202 Housing for the Elderly PRAC portfolio. They provided a $6 million amount for us to supplement RAD rents in that context. So back to public housing. So we've asked for 100 million. We'll see whether we get anything out of that. We've also asked for some non-financial tweaks to the RAD effort. One is, as you mentioned, the date. We've asked to push out or eliminate the date. We have also asked to eliminate the cap so that there isn't a dynamic around potential scarcity for housing authorities that want to participate. And then we've also asked for some legislative changes that would make the RAD Section 18 blends work a little better and pull those into a more unified scheme. That's on the public housing side. On the RAD Component 2 side, we've again asked for supplemental funding for the housing for the elderly conversions. And we've also asked for authority to convert what are called SPRACs or Senior Preservation Rental Assistance Contracts. That's a very small portfolio. They're very like the 202s, but we've asked for authority to convert those as well.
Very good. Tom, that was a lot of really good information. I know our listeners will really, a lot of those questions have been, kind of pervasive and out there. So that was good to hear. Tom, you briefly, I know you kind of touched on just, kind of the senior, the RAD for PRAC, so non-public housing. How's that program? You said you got maybe a little bit of money, 6 million, I think you said last year. How's that? I know that was maybe kind of thing, the rents, it was tough to kind of get projects to pencil out. So what's the early results there?
So we're the RAD for Section 202 PRAC element is a steadily growing pipeline. It's the newest program that's eligible. Well, not quite the newest, because Congress just in the fiscal year 2022 Appropriations Act also authorized us to create a RAD conversion structure for the Section 811 PRACs, the housing for people with disabilities. That has, we haven't written the rules yet, so that one is not up and running yet. And the 202 PRACs are the most recent that is up and running. And we've had transactions coming through for a couple of years now. I think, 2-ish years now. And there is a steadily growing pipeline of projects that are coming through. And it's really gratifying to see these are properties that, they're not in the kind of crisis situation that a lot of public housing properties are. They don't have massive deferred needs, but they have capital needs that are coming up. And, if there isn't a strategy to address those, they could fall into a situation of deferred maintenance. But it's really great to see these owners and properties doing significant upgrades and really refreshing these properties so that they're really great properties for seniors to live in and to age in place and to have a service package that allows them to stay independent as long as possible. And it's a portfolio that is, a really important part of the landscape of HUD assisted housing. And it's great that we are creating a mechanism to ensure that portfolio stays in good shape and doesn't deteriorate over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, thanks for those comments, Tom. Tom, one other, you kind of briefly touched on this too, kind of RAD Section 18 blends. And from my perspective, it's been tremendously successful, right? Getting those blends and the necessary rehab, the debt sizing to get, or the rent sizing to get the debt. And I'm curious, again, from your perspective, I know you said you're looking for a few tweaks, legislative tweaks. What is your kind of observations on the blends and success or the so far?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that the RAD blends are working really well. This was something that we experimented with a little bit. Well, some housing authorities were experimenting with in a sort of ground up kind of way. And then a handful of years ago, we experimented in a more structured way with what were initially the 75% RAD, 25% Section 18 blends, and got a lot of good response to that. And then about 2 years ago, created the current Section 18 blends, which is a more graduated frame. All the way along, it has been looking to deals that are doing significant construction improvement. And we have adjusted the blends so that you're able to now get more Section 18 units, the more construction that you are doing in the construction blends. And we've also introduced the small PHA blends for housing authorities that have fewer than 250 units remaining. And that was in large part because housing authorities were increasingly using the streamlined voluntary conversion mechanism, which is really more designed for a conversion to a mobile tenant-based voucher structure. And yes, it's possible to project base, but it's a little clunky to project base after a streamlined voluntary conversion action. And so the small PHA blend is really sort of if you want to go project base, this is designed for that. And if you want to go mobile vouchers, streamlined voluntary conversion is much more compatible with that end result. So it's really something that gives housing authorities more space to decide, well, what is the vision of serving our community best? Is there adequate housing stock in the community where people with vouchers can choose units on the market? Or is the market really tight and we really should be focusing on project-based assistance because there isn't a good supply of units that will take the vouchers? And so we're really encouraged by the response to the Section 18 blends, both the construction blends, the ones that are only eligible based on the level of construction that you're doing, and the small PHA blends. And we've seen a lot of really great projects come out of the blends where they have the money to do the construction and the renovations to really shift the quality of life for the residents. And it's been really successful. I think one thing that we do have to keep an eye on is that the tenant protection vouchers coming out of the Section 18 conversions are dependent on the adequacy of funding for the tenant protection voucher account. It's gotten a little tight as there has been more demand for TPVs. And HUD has had to start thinking about how do we make sure that we don't run out of TPV funding. And as I mentioned before, we recognize that there's some clunkiness to having, particularly for agencies that want to convert to PBRA. The Section 18 units end up going PBV because that's what the Section 18 process produces. And so it's a little clunky if you want to go PBRA and then you've got a PBRA contract for your RAD units and a PBV contract for your Section 18 units, and they're two separate things. And so that's a large part of why we have asked for a legislative tweak, which would allow us to convert the TPV budget authority under RAD so you could get a unitary, for example, a unitary PBRA contract for all of the units, even though you went through a RAD Section 18 blend. And it just would smooth some of the edges around how the RAD Section 18 blends work.
Oh, very interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Like you said, just, yeah, the clunkiness, the edges, yeah, just continue to make it smooth in the process. So good.
And really trying to bring it together as we've tried to make it as much a one-stop experience for the participating housing authorities as possible, and really trying to amplify that.
That's great. Tom, really just kind of one last question. I'm not, whatever you're able to share, are there any other, we talked a lot about the 2023 budget, things you're looking for, any other kind of high priorities, looking out the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years kind of thing?
Well, the most immediate thing that we're working on is a short supplement to the RAD notice that we are hoping to publish relatively soon. It's not only dealing with half dozen issues or so, but one of them is to implement the $6 million for the Section 202 PRAC conversions, that a notice to implement the Appropriations Act that was passed. We're also looking at, we're still fine tuning what might or might not be in it, but we're looking to, are there things that we can do to protect residents a little more? Are there things that we can do to protect the properties a little more, to think about some of the administration's objectives around energy efficiency and climate, those kinds of things? Are there things that we should be doing in that realm? And then also, are there, in the nitty-gritty, things we can smooth the edges on the RAD Section 18 blends and Faircloth-to-RAD that are at the notice level that don't require statutory change? And so we're looking at whether there are some of those that we might make the system just work a little more easily. Longer term, we are going to be working on the guidance around how Section 811 PRACs would convert under RAD. We are continuing to think about some of the post-conversion issues. When a property wants to refinance or do a transfer of assistance at a subsequent date. How does that work? How does that get processed by HUD? So, there are a number of things that we're working on over the coming months, and we're always looking for ways to make the program more impactful and to figure out how to create more energy from this entrepreneurial creative back and forth that HUD and the Housing Authority development teams have created over these last 10 years. And we think there's a lot of good that housing authorities are doing out there, and we want to make the path to doing it as easy as possible.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Tom. Tom, thank you. I mean, I just really appreciative. I think the industry is really appreciative what you've done here at the office, and really amplifying what you just said, kind of amplifying what housing authority is able to do, preserve, create, and so I think a lot of credit goes to you and your office. So we want to thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, and it's a real team effort between everybody in the Office of Recap and everybody out in the field at the housing authorities and all of the professionals and working with them and the residents working with them on figuring out how to best serve people in the communities across the country.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. And listeners, thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for listening to BuzzHouse. To receive a notification when new episodes are available, please subscribe to BuzzHouse, a Baker Tilly podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. For additional resources around multifamily housing, check out bakertilly.com. And if you have a suggested topic, please send them to build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD@bakertilly.com.